listening to a podcast from The Word.
Mark, I have a stack waddy you'll be pleased to hear.
I'm up for it. Try me.
And you remember last week we were talking about that unique little window in 1967 where just about every British pop group suddenly decided that they should go a little bit psychedelic and wear flowered shirts and make different kinds of records. And so during that year, that's Annus Mirabilis Psychedelicus, just about everybody made a kind of concept album or a psychedelic record. And I want you to tell me which of these 5 didn't actually happen, okay?
So 4 of these are real albums that came out.
4 of these are real albums that came out in 1967.
Are they by groups that were previously pop groups or just any group at all?
You will understand as we
Okay.
go through this list. The first is the Hollies made an album called Evolution. Evolution.
Yep.
And to give you an idea of flavour of it, 2 of the tracks were called Rain on the Window and Ye Old Toffee Shop. You can imagine this, can't you? Ye Old Toffee Shop. So, okay, so that's the first one, Hollies Evolution. And the second one is the Trogs made an album called Cellophane. Cellophane. And a couple of the tracks from that are Butterflies and Bees and the Reg Presley song My Lady. You see, that was one of the things that happened in 1967. They no longer had girlfriends. They had
ladies.
Ladies.
They had amazing ladies.
Amazing
actually,
ladies.
to give them their full title. Okay.
So, number three, Herman's Hermits made an album called Blaze. We started with the Donovan song Museum and also had a song composed by members of the Hermits called Moonshine Man. Moonshine Man.
That's good. Okay.
Number four, The Shadows Jigsaw. The Shadows Jigsaw, which contained their versions of Semi-Detached Suburban Mr. James and Winchester Cathedral. Okay?
Yeah.
And the final one, Jerry and the Pacemakers put out an album called In Colour. In Colour. And it contained their versions of Purple Haze and Fanlight Fanny, the Frowsy Nightclub Queen. Okay? So those are your 5. You've got to tell me which of those 5 is not real.
That's really good. I think I know the answer, but I'm going to eliminate them and say that the Hollies Evolution, I think that existed because I'm sure I remember that actually. Herman's Hermits Blaze, I'm prepared to accept. The Shadows, I like the idea of Jigsaw because they would do a vaguely psychedelic instrumental version of Winchester Cathedral. Cellophane is just a ludicrous name for a record, but I think in this context, the Trogs may well have gone for it. To be honest, I think it's Jerry and the Pacemakers, because the idea of them doing you... I can see you on the Zoom here, and that smile indicates that I've walked into your trap. But I think Jerry the Pacemakers in colour doing Purple Haze is absolutely unimaginable. Go on.
You're correct.
Correct. Okay. Good.
I made that one up. The other 4 are real. Jerry and the Pacemakers never, sadly, recorded the version of Purple Haze, and But anyway. You did well.
That was a bridge too far, but it is astonishing to think the rest. It's the Trogs particularly. The Trogs, and everything I think about as regards to Trogs, I think in terms of the Trogs tapes. And just can you hear those voices? A little bit of fucking fairy dust on it. Oh dear,
oh dear. So
that's good.
Yes, this week at Change Your Gear, the death of Sinead O'Connor. You ever meet Sinead O'Connor?
I did briefly once when we were doing Old Grey Whistle Test in Northern Ireland in 1987, I think. And she was, I think, supporting somebody or other. I can't remember who now. I did meet her briefly. Yeah, right. Quite a complicated person, I have to say.
Right.
Not immensely warm, but extremely fascinating.
It's I don't know very much about her at all. The bits I've read suggest that it's a bit of a sad personal story. a lot of heartbreak there.
Oh, a lot of heartbreak. Very complicated. And I think one of the reasons she wasn't written about hugely, actually, in the last few years was because she did seem slightly cold, actually, but a very complicated person. And it wasn't a warm enough story for people to want to revisit. But the thing that really caught my eye among the enormous number of eulogies was Morrissey's Broadside, which you saw too, didn't you? Which was absolutely amazing. And Morrissey, I mean, it's extraordinary, all the things. I think most of the reaction has been about what she stood for rather than what she recorded, actually. Mostly it's people talking about her ripping up the picture of the Pope on Saturday Night Live in 1992. And, of course, has subsequently been proved very much right about her comments about the sexual abuse to the Catholic Church, etc. But it's completely skewered her career. I forgot that Joe Pesci went on Saturday Night Live the next week and said that if she'd done that on the show that he'd been presenting, he would have slapped her. And he got applause for this. I mean, it's astonishing, isn't it? But I mean, that was a career. That was very much like the Dixie Chicks and Jerry Lee Lewis. It was a moment that kind of pretty much ended her career in America. But Morrissey fired off this broadside. He said, I'm going to quote you. He says, "There is a certain music industry hatred for singers who don't fit in. And this I know only too well."
Oh,
never praised.
Who are you talking about him?
I know. And they are never praised until death, when finally they can't answer back. The cruel playpen of fame gushes with praise for Sinead today, with the usual moronic labels of icon and legend. You praise her now only because it's too late. You hadn't the guts to support her when she was alive and she was looking for you. Who cared enough to save Judy Garland, Whitney Houston, Amy Winehouse, Marilyn Monroe, Billie Holiday? I mean, it's classic Morrissey. In fact, it's classic Twitter in some extent. So he sounds like he's supporting someone, and actually he's having a go at somebody else.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is obviously the rock critic fraternity. But actually, I have to say, I think Morrissey's got a really good point. I think he's got a really good point because people only tended to support her and write about her when at the time that she was doing and releasing the things that she was saying and recording. And now I think a lot of those people are wanting to, it's very self-positioning, isn't it? They're wanting to be associated with her and being seen to approve of her and support her. But I mean, it tends to be the case that if you're not in the public eye, then you don't get written about, And in her case, I looked it up, the last record she made was, she wrote How About I Be Me and You Be You in 2012, and one called I'm Not Bossy, I'm the Boss in 2014. And so there hasn't been much since then. And there's been no excuse for people to reevaluate it. Normally there's a box set, something, everyone goes, hang on a second, this person was incredibly significant. Or, there's one of those pieces where people just look at the most influential people of the 80s or 90s or whatever. And I don't think there's been very much there. And also, I'm not sure that she's that much played on the radio. Everyone was talking in the obituaries about her wonderful cover version. She did an album in 1992 called Am I Not Your Girl, full of kind of classic American songs. Do you remember that record? I Want to Be Loved by You, Why Don't You Do Right, Don't Cry for Me, Argentina. But I actually don't think, they may have been technically quite good, but I never got the impression those things were constantly being replayed on the radio, that people were keeping the idea of her alive. And I think that, unless you're active, you just, the excuse to write about somebody and reevaluate them just disappears something.
I tell you, the thing that struck me yesterday is that, prior to social media, when prominent people died, there would be like 10 obituaries.
Yeah.
They would be written by people in the newspapers or somebody on the telly or whatever. Now, it's the sport everybody can take part in, isn't it? And there's a great haste to kind of advertise your feelings about this.
Yeah.
About these things. Well, not just, so it goes beyond saying, well, I always liked so-and-so, or I always liked this record.
But that doesn't sound like enough, does it?
Doesn't sound enough.
People suddenly feel that they've got to crank it up.
I tell you what the word is that it started to become a real issue with me, is that people routinely describe themselves as devastated by the death of a singer or an actor or a footballer or anybody devastated. This is a person you'd never met. You know what I mean? If you say you're devastated by that, how would you possibly deal with the bereavements that we all go through in our lives, that people genuinely close to us? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just feel this way of talking about these things is kind of cheapening, our feelings about humanity, And Morrissey's thing is, as you say, it purports to be protective, defensive. They're putting his arm around the legacy of Sinead O'Connor. But really what he's doing is putting the boot in to the people he really like to put the boot in on. It's the kind of savagery that comes out with these things, And I know there's an obituary in the Guardian, of all places, which must have been written, I don't know whether it was, very often obituaries are written some while before they actually appear. But that's caused a great deal of ire.
I saw that too, and actually I went back and reread it.
I read it.
I thought it was fine. I mean, all it was doing was pointing out there were a couple of things where she didn't do things that were in her best interest. But in this particular kind of white-hot situation, nobody will accept anything that's even remotely critical. I mean, I do understand that, but it's just difficult. But I thought that Guardian thing was okay, actually. Yeah,
it's just it's a kind of binary medium, isn't it? You've either got to be completely for it or completely against it.
You can't come in and say, I'm just sorry to hear that
there's no shades.
No, there's no shade in the middle. You've got to be absolutely mortified,
Yeah.
But no, it's a sad old story, though. It has to be said.
Oh,
I watched I think you might have seen it too. I watched the footage of her at the Bob Dylan 1992 30th anniversary. And anybody who's not seen it, it's worth seeing it. It's extraordinary. Because this was 2 weeks after she tore up the picture of the Pope, which caused an absolute outroar and drawing attention to, child abuse, etc., etc. And so she goes on stage. Chris Christopherson brings her on stage at the Dylan concert, and she's meant to perform, I think it was I Believe in You. And it is worth watching because for about 2 minutes, she just stands there waiting for these boos and this very aggressive reception to die down. And it doesn't die down. And then she goes into a kind of half-sung, half-spoken, kind of improvised version of Bob Marley's War. Until the philosophy which hold one race superior and another race inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned everywhere is war, etc. I mean, it's just gripping, isn't it? And Christopherson comes on and whispers in her ear. What he actually said was, "Don't let the bastards grind you down." And she turned to him and said, "I'm not down." So it's an electrifying moment, and. I can see why people felt very strongly about her. She did a lot of very unconventional things.
Yeah. And also this week, the death of the rather less legendary Randy Meisner of the Eagles.
Yeah.
Which is, if you look into it, that is an extraordinary story. When did he leave the Eagles? 77?
He left in 77. I mean, he was part of the original group with the backing band for Linda Ronstadt.
And he wrote things like Take It to the Limit
and sang the high part on that, the main vocal. He must have made sufficient money out of that to have never worked again because he almost didn't work again.
He almost didn't work again.
I mean, I just had a quick look at that. Yeah, he died of a chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And obviously been ill for a long time, and left the Eagles in 77 because he was just so exhausted by it all. Also had a massive falling out with Glenn.
But also shy, really shy.
Didn't want to be in the spotlight.
You see, I think this is quite interesting. That being a professional musician can be a rough old life.
Yeah.
Being a really famous professional musician can be an even rougher old life. Actually, because if you don't have to deal with massive public attention, that's relatively easy, isn't it? Dealing with the, you've got to have a thick skin to survive, don't you? You had this conversation many times before in the light of, my favourite example of this is Richard Thompson, Nick Drake and John Martin, all roughly the same age, all roughly the same kind of background. You know what I mean? And Richard Thompson found a way to deal with it. Yeah. The other two never really did, some people just have a survivor's instinct about it. They do. And other people just don't. And Randy Meisner, who's obviously, been in bands for a while, and then suddenly the band he was in, the Eagles, was suddenly enormous. And there was one stage when they were doing some concert, and they did 2 encores, and then Glenn Fry wanted them to go out and do another, and Randy Meisner wouldn't do it because it was just too much for him. He couldn't deal with the attention, and then pretty much left the group after that.
They fell out, didn't they? Yeah,
which is extraordinary.
He was frozen out of the group. Actually, they just wouldn't talk to him.
Really?
Oh yeah, that's a horrible story.
And then and then the rest of his life marked by
Well, 2 interesting things happened, didn't they? 2 very odd things. One was the thing about the imposter. Did you follow that?
Oh, no, go on.
Oh, yeah. At one stage, there was an imposter impersonating Don Henley, racking up huge bills, this, that, and the other. This guy was arrested. He was put on bail. He jumped bail, and he reappeared a month later doing exactly the same thing, but now impersonating Randy Meisner, who I suppose was less recognizable. It might have been easier. I don't know. Actually, he did look quite like Randy Meisner. I saw a picture of him, So he was conning shops and hotels and conning women, apparently, which gives you some indication of the aphrodisiac power of being a rock star, that 20 years after the event, he's pretending to be Randy Meisner. Women were apparently floored by this. And conning musical instrument manufacturers. I mean, that's a bizarre story. But the other story, which is just, it's very sad and complicated. Just, again, an indication of just how you cannot predict the way people's lives are going to turn out. That his wife, his second wife, I think it was, died in an accident in 2016, taking a rifle case down from a shelf in one of the rooms in their house. And inside the rifle case, he somehow had been put a pair of spurs from his cowboy boots, and she tilted this thing and it slid down the case and knocked into the hair trigger, and the gun inexplicably was loaded, and the gun went off and killed her. I mean, why you would pack away a rifle that was loaded, I have no idea. Why indeed would you have a rifle in the first place? I don't know. It's a complicated story. But that's that. And this guy must have, he really, since 1982, has done virtually nothing at all. He joined Poco again. He was a member of Poco, wasn't he?
Yeah.
But otherwise, living on the presumably still absolutely colossal royalties from the Eagles. And just thought something else about Morrissey, actually. So I'm just going to mention this. We talked about Morrissey earlier. It's really fascinating how quickly people's reputations can change. Morrissey, in 2006, there was a TV program about, the greatest living British icon, voted by BBC viewers, 2006. So what is that? 17 years ago. Where do you think Morrissey finished up in that?
Oh, was he high? Go on.
He was second. So David Attenborough was first. Morrissey was second. Who was third? Yes, Paul McCartney. So Morrissey was above, for BBC viewers, above Paul McCartney in the greatest living British icon. And, you may not be aware of this, but Morrissey, in the last couple of weeks, has been touring this country. And I bet you got no indication that happened. No. I just happened to be following something on social media, and someone had said something about it and saying how wonderful he was. And I looked at the replies to this, and of course the usual amount of bile. But Morrissey has toured Britain very, very recently to great success, to just absolutely adoring crowds, and yet we've heard nothing about it.
No, yes.
It just goes completely quiet. Isn't it extraordinary?
I suppose it probably depends, although it's a bit, social media, if it's your major source of information, which it increasingly is, it's kind of self-fulfilling thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That if you happen to follow loads of people who are Morrissey fans, you probably would be aware of that stuff. And if you don't, you wouldn't be. It's all, it depends on your particular enthusiasm.
But normally I think you'd see reviews in papers or whatever. You're just hearing about it. You'd be aware it was going on. But it's not. It's closed down to just hardcore Morrissey fans, and nobody else is commenting on it.
So that's extraordinary. So it was number 2 in the great.
Number two. If they did that poll again tomorrow, where would it be?
I don't think he would be.
Not very high.
Up there at all.
So what else has happened? Well, Oppenheimer. Our film's too long.
Definitely.
Oppenheimer's 3 hours long.
Have you been? I haven't been.
No, I'd really like to go. I'd like to see that. I'd really like to see Barbie too. I think they both suffer. Barbie, everybody who's saying it's absolutely fantastic. I'm sure it is. Yeah, I'd love to see it. But Oppenheimer, 3 hours. Mark Billingham, our old pal, tweeted a really good point about it. So if movies are so expensive to make, why are they making them so long? Surely it would saving millions and millions of dollars.
But they're not interested. You see, if you're making Oppenheimer, you're not interested in making it cheaper at all.
No, not really.
Because the whole deal is it's huge.
Yeah.
So scale becomes, it stands in for loads of other things, doesn't it? Really.
Yeah.
If you do something long enough, it seems really important. And I've. And also the thing about long things, I think, is that once something's 3 hours long, the need for it to have any kind of narrative coherence has completely gone.
Yeah.
Because
you followed it so far.
Nobody at the end of 3 hours is possibly remembering anything that happened 3 hours earlier. It's just been overtaken by a succession of experiences and sensations. Whereas if you watch, I tell you what I watched last night, my birthday treat. You sat on the sofa in the afternoon with a cup of tea and watched The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3.
Oh, great film.
Walter Matthau, 1974. Fantastic, basic thriller set in the New York subway system where Robert Shaw and a bunch of henchmen hijack a subway train and get $1 million out of the city. But the point about that film is it's kind of an hour and a half or whatever. And therefore, I could sit down and I could write the plot for it now. I could probably do that from memory. I bet you can't do that with Oppenheimer or any film that's 3 hours long. It's kind of episodic.
I don't think you can. I've got a couple of theories about. One is that I think long form TV has informed this. Is that feature filmmakers now think they wish they could have just more opportunity to explore characters than they would in the normally abbreviated 90-minute version. But the other thing I think is that it's just like what you were saying, is that here's the statistic, here's the thing. I found a piece in Variety this morning, and it was saying that most of the highest grossing films in history fall between 2 and 3 hours long. And only one Oscar Best Picture winner, which was Annie Hall, comes in at just about an hour and 30 minutes. So that, I think, indicates two things. That to the consumer, length indicates kind of, to some extent, substance, but certainly value for money. But to critics, it's stature and importance, isn't it? If you look at those big films, look, Titanic, Avatar, Jurassic World, Lord of the Rings, Spider-Man, Gone with the Wind, Dave, 3 hours, 58 minutes. Lawrence of Arabia, nearly 4 hours. Ben-Hur, 3.5 hours.
And what were you, when you look down the list of the Best Picture films of all time, winners in the Oscars, what do they pretty much all have in common? What category of films do you never find?
Well, you never find comedies.
You never find comedies. And comedies are by their nature quite short because they're trying to keep you amused.
Yeah, which you can't do for 3 hours.
Don't go on too long.
Yeah,
whereas drama, I can't bring it on. Just more and more stuff,
Act 6, Act 7.
I watched The Irishman, the Scorsese thing,
which is also extremely long, isn't it?
This is ridiculously long. And I watched it twice. And I kind of quite enjoyed it, but I haven't a clue what it's supposed to be about, really. Can I write down what that was? Not really. Can I tell you who all the characters were? Not really at all. It's too much for you to hold in your head.
The story isn't the point of that. The point of that is just being in the company of these people and the way they speak and the way they communicate. Don't you think?
I suppose so.
It's the exchanges between them.
Yeah. Talking of wonderful visual entertainment, further to our recent strand of looking at old slice of life documentaries about rock bands who never made it, under which umbrella we've already met Punch. Rainier, the progressive band who didn't make it, and Punch, who were they're on the kind of cabaret on the working men's club circuit in the mid-70s. Shane Pacey sent me a link to a group called, well, it's a documentary connected with an Australian group called Hush. This was a completely new one on me. And then this film, which is quite a serious kind of half-hour properly done film, wasn't it, really?
Yeah.
And they're filming this Australian group called Hush, who had a couple of hits in Australia in 1976. And they're on tour. They're on a 3-month
tour, playing 90 dates.
3-month tour of Australia. Now, this was news to me because I didn't realize it was possible to do a 3-month tour of Australia. I don't think it would be any longer, really, because it starts with a lorry, driven by the roadies, pulling out of what the voiceover describes as one nameless outback town in order to drive 300 miles to another nameless outback town, which is, I thought, an extraordinary thing, really, in a voiceover. They don't normally do that kind of thing.
No, they don't.
They normally say whatever the name of the place is. But they were doing 3 months of, one-nighters where they turn up in these small communities, and every young person, everybody under the age of 20, it was the
only show in town, wasn't it?
Completely the only show in town. And the members of Hush would, regale them. And the members of Hush kind of, what were they like? They're like a cross between sweet and kind of.
They're kind of glam, and it seems bizarre because A, they're Australian, and B, this is 1976 or 1977. There they are clambering into their huge stack-heeled scarlet knee-high boots and capes,
absolutely,
and looking absolutely absurd. But they're playing not very good covers of Glad All Over by the Dave Clark Five. So it doesn't seem that thrilling to us, but that's how starved people are for entertainment.
Absolutely. And what this film focuses on really is less the group than the road group.
It's the roadies, yeah.
And it's basically about, what a cruel and difficult life it is being a road manager, because they're not getting rich out of it at all, and it basically focuses on these guys and say, why do you do this?
But also, don't you think it's clever the way the tone of the film changes? Because it starts off with the voiceover. The voiceover is the classic kind of voiceover. This is an Australian voiceover. But it's all kind of kaleidoscopic props to bend the kids' minds as well as their ears. So some of the audience will dance. The more courageous fans will shout or swoon. And there's a lovely bit where he says you get a picture of these cheeky girls nursing big glasses of wine, and it says, having gained the refuge of the motel, selected fans are allowed to come a little closer. And then he says, this is the key point, the key change in the movie. He says, the teenage fans are entranced by the surface glamour, and they would give anything for a roadie's job. And then it changes, doesn't it? It says, actually, do you know what? This is really grim. And these guys go, well, it is quite hard. And you discover that, there's another brilliant clue where it says that, I don't know if you notice this, he says that Hush said are experts on efficiency. They were a 5-piece band, but they sacked the 5th member as they realized that one more person to feed and put in the hotel room was going to be costing them money. So they're doing all this with only 4. I mean, it's just amazing. And so then this picture emerges that after each gig, the members of Hush, still in their terrible stack-heeled scarlet boots, are entertaining the lucky ladies and drinking the wine and having their Chinese banquets. And the roadies are piling all the gear into a lorry and setting off at 2 o'clock, at 1 o'clock in the morning to drive to the next town across the outback, And you discover they're being paid, how much is it? $1 an hour.
It's not a lot. I was interested, there are 3 of them, I think.
Yeah.
And then the third one, the introducer said, he's the old hand. He's a veteran of the European rock circuit, and he's 29.
Yeah.
And I thought, my goodness, that gives you an idea of how things have changed, because I don't think you find many 29-year-olds roadieing nowadays.
No, you wouldn't.
You know, they're all lifers, aren't they? You know what I mean? They're a totally different breed of people. But it's, it's really worth seeing because it's got a genuine tang of 1976.
Oh, it has. And you want the interviewer to go back to the band and put it to them and say, it's a proper piece of journalism, and say, do you feel bad about exploiting yourself? And they sort of do.
They do.
And the band go on about the fact that actually the roadies have got bigger egos and they want to be rock stars themselves. Who are the people throwing the TV sets out of the windows and getting us in all this trouble? It's not us, it's the roadies, So that's their defense. But I did think it was amazing. And it made me think that, if that kind of thing was to be happening today, that would be the subject of a kind of industrial tribunal, don't you think? People are being sued for gross exploitation.
Yeah. So contrast that with that picture I sent you. Pulp have recently finished a UK tour.
Oh, yeah.
And they published on social media just a shot of all the team involved in the show, on the tour. Just saying, successful tour, thanks very much to everybody kind of thing. And I just thought it was really interesting because it reminded you just of how many people are involved in this kind of show.
I counted 57 people in that.
Oh, well, good. Okay, it was a lot.
I think it's 57.
57.
I don't know how many of those were part of the touring entourage, because some of them would be accountants and business people, I guess.
Okay,
but it was 57 people that were.
You see, they probably are part of the touring organisation nowadays, because that was the interesting thing about seeing that alongside having watched the documentary about Hush during the Outback in 1977.
Yeah.
The scale of a production nowadays, because obviously you got the band. Let's work it out who was there. I mean, we don't know, but you can work it out from what you know about how bands function.
Yeah.
There'll have been a drum roadie, there'll have been a bass roadie, won't there?
Yeah.
All specific people. There are people doing the back line. Lights, sound, people carrying things in and out. There will be security. Drivers. There will be, people driving the band back and forth. There will be merch. There will be, as you said, accountancy services. There might be a doctor on these kind of things as well. How many people do you say you got? 57 people. That's a lot of people,
It's incredible.
And it's just, I thought it was quite interesting because, people talk about ticket prices and I paid 50 quid or £100 or whatever. And there's only 4 of them. They must be making a fortune.
Yeah. Well, 25% each. Yeah.
It's not really like that at all.
Really no, it made me think. I was looking at this news story about Adele, and Adele was going to play Las Vegas. It was called off because she didn't think the show was ready and all that. And she started the show, and this is a residency in Las Vegas at the Coliseum, and it's been very, very popular inevitably. And so she's extended. Now she's extended by 34 nights. Jesus and Christ. You start thinking, this is a business model that must be very, very attractive for the performer. Because for 34 nights, they sell just over 4,000 tickets a night. Do you know how much these tickets cost? Cheapest ones are 800 quid. The most expensive are around 4,000 quid. So I worked out that she's making 8 million. The net is 8 million a night.
You mean the gross?
The gross. The gross, right? The gross is 8 million a night. So that's roughly 280 million, maybe call it 300 million for the entire run. But they don't have to travel anywhere. They don't have to do anything. They simply close up the venue and they open it up at 4 o'clock the next afternoon and check it all out again. Nobody's got to move anything. No one's got to change anything. It's just all there. You don't have to. All the people who are doing all the traveling are the people coming to you.
No, absolutely.
That business model must be very, very attractive now. Do you think?
Well, it always has been, hasn't it? Because Vegas was started to do that, and it used to be. It used to be people in tuxedos. People in tuxedos on stage.
Yeah,
and then people in the best suits turning up to see them, whether it was Dean Martin or Sammy Davis or Liberace or whatever.
Yeah.
And now it's, because what changed Vegas, it seems to me, was Cirque du Soleil.
Yeah, probably.
The the introduction of whole new levels of spectacle.
Yeah.
And therefore, you've got to provide spectacle. You need venues that allow you to
but that was spectacle. It was
spectacle.
so complicated. I saw Cirque du Soleil, actually. I went to it. That's
I saw it.
there. Yeah, did you? Yeah.
Well, not in Vegas. I saw Cirque du Soleil in the Albert Hall. This must be 20 years ago nowadays. But it's one of those things. And it's quite interesting, and it indicates something about the changing nature of entertainment. That you go and see Cirque du Soleil, and I'm sure loads of people listening have been to see it one form or another. And what is it, really? Is it circus? Is it
Panto?
Is it whatever? I don't know.
Is it rock opera?
What it is, mainly, is a spectacle.
It's a spectacle, entirely.
It's a spectacle. Because, and that's the interesting thing, is that what is it if you'd gone to see Elton John on his tour that's just finished, what is that? Is that music? Does anybody come away thinking, do you know, I really thought he did a really nice version of a guess, that's why they call it the blues. You know what I mean? I like the piano sound. No, I don't. I wouldn't have thought they did that at all. What they come back they're enthusing about is just a spectacle.
Yeah.
It's the scale of the thing.
Well, that's the thing. So I was out there interviewing Elton John actually in Las Vegas, and I went to that the next day because I just thought I've got to go and see it, and not kind of my kind of thing. But what I took away from that was it was so complicated technically that you couldn't tour it.
Oh, of course you couldn't
possibly take the equipment that produced this kind of scenery change and light movement and all that kind of stuff. You couldn't move it, So you could see why it was a residency.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Oh, go and look at my notes in front of me here now. We haven't mentioned Getting It Straight in Notting Hill Gate. Did you manage to watch that?
I watched that. Yes, I did. Yeah. Yeah.
This is a documentary about Notting Hill Gate in 1967, featuring Quintessence turning up at the end there, doing their thing. And it's just extraordinary, isn't it? Because that was the time when Notting Hill was full of hippies and poor people, wasn't it?
It was.
Simple as that.
It describes it as a cultural and racial melting pot, probably the world's first integrated ghetto, is how they're described, which is interesting because it was quite a posh place before, and it's now a fantastically posh place subsequently.
Incredibly posh.
At that time, you got Caroline Coon being interviewed in the release office, isn't she? Talking about how awful it is that the fuzz keep busting us. It's all that kind of stuff. Paddy wagons on patrol. It's really interesting. It's just interesting that areas of cities can just go up and go down and come back up again.
I do think I found slightly frustrating about it. The film is that it focused on kind of the artists, Quintessence doing their thing and a poet doing his thing and release and so forth. And that's all very well and good. But what you really wanted the camera to do is just linger in the street outside.
Just want to see
I want to see those people.
I kept looking at it and thinking, that's a bit of Notting Hill Gate I do recognise.
Yeah, this is it.
And it's been transformed.
But it's also the great truth about the real swinging 60s that is never conveyed in the kind of Austin Powers version of it or whatever, is that the dominant group on the streets were elderly people.
Yeah, they were.
With false teeth.
Yeah, looking quite disapproving of the young folks busking, going, how dare you? This is an imposition.
It was poor old people. Because they were just there, It wasn't a kind of youthful pleasure zone.
No, absolutely.
Like it subsequently became, But no, that's it's interesting to see.
It is.
And if you've got any more tips for old slice of life documentaries with musical content, particularly, if you find these things on YouTube. I know somebody was sending me the link to the famous Kersal Flyers documentary from the mid-70s, featuring Paul Conroy and Will Birch in the back of a van, and we'll no doubt get round to that in due course. But if you've got any other suggestions, anything you've found, send it to us. As I say, I am planning in my head a weekend at the NFT.
Wouldn't it be great?
Screaming.
Of all these little time capsule documentaries. Be really good fun.
It'd be really
compulsory. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Dylan's motorbike crash, Mark.
Well, I'm just very interested in this because I'm interested in the idea of how slowly news used to travel. In fact, I was thinking this the other day because I was in Broadstairs in Kent a couple of days ago with a couple of mates on a cycle trip. And we were in Broadstairs was where the news of the Battle of Waterloo, the victory at Waterloo, the guy carrying the news had come from the battle site, which was in Belgium, I think, wasn't it?
Belgium.
And arrived off the boat in Broadstairs and then rode that horse to London to tell them that we had won and Napoleon was defeated. And that took 3 days. Isn't it extraordinary? 3 days that news to get through. And in 1966, we're recording this on the 28th of July, on the 29th of July, 66, which 7 years ago, was Dylan's motorcycle crash. And equally, the news took an incredibly long time to get out, partly because, of course, he wanted to get out. But it just struck me there were a load of interesting circumstances about that. One is that what an intense time he was living through. He'd recorded Blonde on Blonde in January and February. Very fraught sessions, 4 o'clock in the morning, Sad-Eyed Lady, Bob Johnson, etc. He'd just done a 46-date tour of the world. 46 dates in Australia, in Sweden, in Europe. And this is the Judas moment. This is the Albert Hall. This is Manchester. This was the Don't Look Back documentary. So they'd done the film. He'd come back to Woodstock, where he lived at the time, at the end of May. Blonde on Blonde was released on the 20th of June. And at that time, he just had a huge number of things hanging over him. He had to finish Tarantula. He had a publishing deal, and he had to get this book finished, Tarantula. He had to make a new album. He had a new tour set up, which I didn't actually know about. I had a look at it. He was going to play Shea Stadium on August the 13th. Wasn't that amazing?
Wow, good grief.
He was going to go to Russia. He would have been the first ever rock musician to have played in Russia. This is with the same band, with the touring member, with the band, in fact. He was playing the Festival of Roses in Rome. He had all this stuff there, and he was absolutely knackered and just wanted to get into family life. And then he went out on the motorbike, on the Triumph. And Sally Grossman and Albert Grossman, his manager, were following in the car a little way behind. They came around the corner. There he was on the road. And Sally Grossman said he was kind of moaning and groaning, but he didn't look that injured. And, for someone who's meant to have broken his neck and all this, he didn't go to hospital. He went to a doctor an hour away, which is in itself pretty extraordinary. And he convalesced for a bit. Robbie Robertson claimed that he had seen him in a neck brace. There are no indications this is true at all. And as far as I can see, the only reporting of this story was a 2-sentence mention in the New York Times, which was headlined "Dylan Hurt in Cycle Mishap." And then eventually Melody Maker on the 13th of August saying Dylan has broken neck vertebrae. Oh, that was really interesting. And it also began this period where he was really out of the public eye for quite a long time. You think how intensely he was in it.
Well, it seemed a long time at the time, didn't it? Because
it really did seem a long time.
People didn't disappear in those days.
No, they didn't disappear. And this was the Summer of Love. You got to remember the Summer of Love. You'd think he'd be right at he wasn't. The only thing he did was John Wesley Harding, which had nothing. He'd gone in the furthest possible direction, the opposite way with John Wesley Harding. I don't think he released anything at all in 1968. Nashville Skyline in 69, and he did play the Isle of Wight because there was so much money involved. Self-Portrait, these weren't they weren't fully realized records, really, were they? New Morning, sort of, made the Pat Garrett film. Then there was the Dylan album, which is a contractual filler in 1970. He didn't really reappear till 1974. So I thought that was quite interesting, really. How little we knew about him and how little we knew about what had happened. And also, we still don't know. Now, we don't know really what happened. It was obvious that there's a bit where there's a newspaper article I found where Grossman is apologizing for the fact that he can't play an Italian festival. And he says, my client will not be available again until March 1967. This was in August 1966. So he decided to say to the outside world that he wasn't going to be available. But it's interesting, isn't it? I love these things that are still mysterious after all this time.
You see, that is the genius of the greatest sustained mystique in popular music.
Yeah.
And that's all the product of him sticking rigorously to the policy of never apologize, never explain.
Yeah.
Since 1963. Yeah. That's the way he's been. and keeping that kind of distance has stood him in such good stead. Whereas everybody else, something goes wrong in their career, they go rushing to the microphone. They go to the sofas, as they used to say in the days
absolutely.
of Oprah Winfrey or whatever. I have to go out and explain. You don't make anything any better at all. Whereas, and I like the idea that Grossman used to refer to him as my client.
Yeah, that's great.
It's not like Brian Epstein. He didn't talk about the boys. No, my client.
I know, it's good.
Got a rather wintry tone about it. That has.
I know.
It suggests that there'll be a huge lawsuit if you speculate about what he's been up to.
And by not doing anything at all, it just makes it more. It's just like him recording the music for a sort of Victoria's Secret's lingerie. He just didn't say anything about it. So we don't know to this day whether he did it because it was just amused him, or because it was really good money, or it was just being ironic.
Well, it'll be all of those.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what he was. It's just him being him. You can't possibly explain any of it.
And the worst possible thing to do is talk about it.
Yeah.
No, I didn't. The time it takes used to take news to travel. Yeah, I've quoted this before. When Jim Morrison died in Paris in 1971, it took 2 weeks for that news to be published in the UK.
Yeah.
Because first week, Melody Maker published a story saying, we've heard that Jim Morrison may have died, kind of thing. We'll confirm it or not in due course. And it wasn't until a week later.
Yeah.
And I think the news only got to Morrison's people in LA via the Melody Maker. Is
that right?
Yeah. That kind of... Los Angeles and Paris seemed so far apart in those days, whereas things nowadays, the case, I'm sure I've talked about this before, when Amy Winehouse died, and that was a Saturday afternoon, and I was just sitting watching, I don't know, Racing from Utoxeter or whatever.
Yeah.
And I had my phone and Twitter open, and somebody I follow say, is this true about Amy Winehouse? And I thought, I have no idea what that means. And so I just searched Amy Winehouse, and my screen was just racing past me. People all over the world, people who knew nothing and people who did know something, people who lived nearby or whatever. And so I knew pretty certain that she died hours before the BBC were able to confirm it. Well, fair enough. I'm not suggesting the BBC should have jumped the gun or anything like that, but you just realised that it was an extraordinary example of just how news travelled in a fundamentally different way nowadays.
Well, social media is how I've discovered all those. It's the first time you ever hear that anybody's ever died. It's nearly always social media, isn't it? Because otherwise, what television program is going to be interrupted for it, or radio program?
Beyond that, it's the first place you hear about literally everything.
Literally everything.
The notion that there could ever be an official announcement about, I don't know, the fall of a government or whatever, that it would ever be first of all broken on a news bulletin is nonsense. It wouldn't happen anymore. It would be broken on social media. If only 3 minutes before, it would be.
But it would still be first. Exactly.
They would still be first.
Yeah.
That's just the way it works, it's very different from, but I think you're right that, I think it's intriguing that Grossman and his wife turned up in the car, and there he is lying out there on the road, but they've never seen it happen.
I know. I thought that was really interesting. And, if he really had broken his neck, how could he possibly have not gone to a hospital? He went to a doctor an hour. They drove him for an hour to a doctor who allowed him to recuperate from it. So the general feeling is there wasn't an awful lot wrong with him. but they just thought, let's come to an agreement. Let's get out of all these things. He had a TV special he had to do. All these things hanging over him. He just thought, I can't take this anymore. I just can't, And, having seen, Don't Look Back at that time, you can see what he was going through, how strung out he was. It was amazing. You really admire him because, the amount of pressure on him to keep himself in the limelight and to not worry about his reputation receding. And yet for 6 years, he pretty much went onto the back foot, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
And then came back with stuff like Blood on the Tracks. And eventually Rolling Thunder. Rolling Thunder was the big return. Yeah. Amazing.
So, no, Rolling Thunder is not the big return. Surely. It's the tour with the band. The tour with the band.
Oh, the 74 tour. That's right. 74 tour. That's the one. It was. That's right.
Anyway, what was I going to say? We can't finish without wishing Mick Jagger a happy 80th birthday.
Well, right, 80. I know.
It's just extraordinary, isn't it?
I love it.
I find the idea of Mick Jagger being 80 just kind of strange and amusing, don't you?
Was it Mick Jagger himself who couldn't imagine doing it beyond the age of 40? Or was it just everybody else?
Mick Jagger said it himself. I think he said at one stage, I won't be doing this when I'm 35. And then later on he said, I'll be doing this when I'm 40. And then when he was 40, he said, I won't be doing this when I'm 45. And then just stopped talking about it really, And he had a party, didn't he? He had a couple of parties this week. Sadly, I couldn't go, but do you remember
those headlines? They used to have headlines that they, 40 years ago said the combined age of the Rolling Stones is 186.
They've done that. They've done that since they were all about 26.
I know.
It's one of the most overplayed ideas, isn't it? But I did think it was extraordinary that there he is, apparently hale and hearty. And then the same week, did you see the footage of Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, doing a press, and he's 81, doing a press conference in a corridor in the Senate where he just blanked out. He just completely stopped talking. He had a
senior moment.
More than a senior
moment.
This is live,
Jesus.
And was led away by other senators. And then apparently recovered and kind of came back and did some kind of performance. And you just thought, my God, this is the world we're in now.
It is.
80-year-old rock stars.
I know.
And what's Joe Biden? Is he
Joe Biden? No, he's going to be, if he gets re-elected, he will be 80, won't he? I think he's in the late 70s. It's unbelievable.
It is. And I think
Dylan, there's a bit of footage of Dylan taking a bit of a stumble on stage recently. I don't know if you saw that, where he trips up, pretty much falls into the piano. You think, oh my Lord. He's going to be doing the whole set sitting down soon.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.